Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. I welcome you all to this lecture in the course Sandhi in Paninian Grammar. So far in this course we have studied Ach Sandhi, Hal Sandhi, we also studied Visarga Sandhi. Now after having studied these three important parts of Sandhi, in this lecture we shall start studying the next important part of the Sandhi, which is Swadi Sandhi. What is a Swadi Sandhi? Swadi Sandhi is a Sandhi which substitutes the Swadi suffixes in the specific environment of deriving a pada, and this pada is embedded in the derivation of a sentence or vakya. So, to put it in the form of an equation, we can say that if we have this particular string which consists of a big bracket left hand side over here and a right hand side bracket over here, indicating that this is a sentence, and this has got three internal square brackets indicating that they are padas, the constituents of the sentence, and as the definition of sentence goes, there should be at least one thing, and thing is a pratyaya attached to a particular type of prakriti, namely dhatu. So this is dhatu plus thing, this is one pada, and the remaining padas will contain sup as the pratyaya. So there are these two sups, and the prakriti for sup is a pratipadika. So therefore we have pratipadika plus sup, one pada, pratipadika plus sup, second pada, and dhatu plus thing as the third pada, making this one complete sentence. Now in this particular structure, this is a prakriti, this is a pratyaya, this is pratipadika, this is sup. Now at the end of this sup, there appears a particular sound, and at the beginning of this second pada, where there is a pratipadika, at the beginning of this there is one more element, and then this element at the end of the first pada, which is part of sup, is substituted by a particular element. Similarly, in between these two padas, this is a subanta, this is a sup, and this is a tinganta, at the beginning of which appears a verbal root, a dhatu. So now this sup has got a particular element at the end, and this dhatu has got another particular element at the beginning, and then in this environment this particular verbal element gets substituted by another verbal element. So this is a substitute in place of a sup, this is a substitute in place of another sup in the sentence. This particular sandhi is called Swadi Sandhi. As you see, this Swadi Sandhi is part of the derivation of a pada which is embedded in the derivation of a complete sentence. So when we derive a sentence, this is how the sentence gets derived. All the elements, namely pratipadika plus sup, plus Pratipadika plus sup plus dhatu plus ting, they are all placed side by side, and the derivation of each pada starts simultaneously and keeps on moving until it reaches a particular stage where internal derivation is completed, and then finally this external derivation of the padas, namely the internal derivation of the sentence, happens. So when two padas come into close contact, there happens a substitution in place of this sup, and this is primarily what is referred to as swadi sandhi. What is a swadi? Swadi is popularly called and technically also called vibhakti, defined by 14104 in the Ashtadhyayi. This 14104 terms both sup as well as ting as vibhakti. Sup is a set of 21 suffixes added after a nominal root, also known as Pratipadika. These 21 suffixes are stated in 412 in the Ashtadhyayi. Ting are the 18 suffixes which are added after a verbal root, stated in 3478 in the Ashtadhyayi, and they both are called vibhakti. In addition, there are some more suffixes which are stated in 531 to 27. They are, for example, tral, da, danim, thal, etc. These tral, da, danim and thal, they are also termed as vibhakti. Here, la, ma and la, they are marked in different colors only to indicate that they are the markers. These la are the markers and ma is not the marker. Otherwise, these colors don't play any role, any function over here. What is important is to know what is a swadi. So, swadi stands for these 21 suffixes stated in 412, and swadi sandhi is the sandhi that takes place of these suffixes when they come into the contact of the other pada. So, swadi sandhi primarily refers to the external sandhi which happens between two padas, mainly between a subanta and the next pada, be it a subanta or a tinganta. Here are the 21 sups for you. Sa, au, as, au, as, abhyam, bhis, ebhyam, bhyas, asbhyam, bhyas, as, os, am and e, os, sup. Now in these 21 suffixes, as we note, the consonant that comes at the end and which undergoes the sandhi operation is sa. In 11, 13, 23, 33, 43, 51 and 53, 61 and 62 and 72. Sa appears at the end of all these suffixes. So when these sups come into close proximity with the other subantas, at the beginning of which appears a pratipadika, or a tinganta at the beginning of which appears a verbal root, then this is modified in a particular manner. This is what is known as swadi sandhi. Along with the sup, we also have the subanta forms listed for you, namely Ramaha, Ramau, Ramaha, Ramam, Ramau, Raman, Ramena Ramabhyam Ramaihi, Ramaya Ramabhyam Ramebhyaha, Ramat Ramabhyam Ramebhyaha, Ramasya Ramayoho Ramanam, and Rame Ramayoho Rameshu. So in these cases where there is Ramaha, Ramaha, Ramaihi, Ramebhyaha, Ramebhyaha, Ramayoho and Ramayoho, in these cases there is Visarga substitution that has already happened, and then when this substitution comes into close contact, in close proximity with another Subanta or another Tinganta, this Visarga Visi gets modified by some other verbal elements. This is what is called Swadi Sandhi. Ma occurring at the end of these padas and also elsewhere over here and over here undergoes the general Hal Sandhi operation, namely if it is followed by a Hal, then this Ma is substituted by an Anuswara, by the Sutra Monuswaraha. So this is not treated in the section of Swadi Sandhi. And these are the things, tip, tas, jhi, etc. So we note that in thing also there are these suffixes that end in sa, tas, thas, vas and mas, thas, which end in sa. So even in their case the Swadi Sandhi applies. These are the forms. So we have Nayati Nayataha Nayanti, Nayasi Nayathaha Nayatha, Nayami Nayavaha Nayamaha, and Nayate Nayate Nayante, Nayase Nayathe Nayadve, Naye Nayavahe Nayamahe. So in case of Nayataha, Nayathaha, Nayavaha and Nayamaha, the Sandhi has already taken place, and some other Sandhis can also take place of sa coming at the end in a given specific environment. This is also studied under Swadi Sandhi, and that is why this peculiar chapter in the Pancha Sandhi Prakarana. So if we take a recap of what we discussed of this question, what is a Swadi Sandhi, we can now pinpointedly state what that Swadi Sandhi is by giving specific examples. Earlier we saw template examples. So if we have Ramas followed by Gramam followed by Nayati, these are the three padas. They make one big sentence. Ramas, Gramam and Nayati. These are the derived finished padas. Now they come into contact with each other, and this in the environment of this G which follows, which comes into close proximity, is substituted to some element, notably Ru first, then it is substituted in U, and then A plus U becomes O, and so you have Ramo Gramam Nayati as the finally derived form of the sentence. As you note, this Ma is substituted by an Anuswara because there is a Hal that follows. So Ramam Gramam Nayati, this consists of this Sandhi which is called the Swadi Sandhi. This Sandhi is not pertinent only to the Swadis, it is a general Sandhi, and that is why it is not categorized under Swadi Sandhis. Similarly, if you have Ramena Gramas Gamyate, the passive voice, then the output is Ramena Gramo Gamyate. Once again the similar rule plays, and this is substituted by Ru, which in its turn is substituted by U, and then A plus U, and then A plus U becomes O, and finally you have Ramena Gramo Gamyate. This is the finally derived sentence. So, these are the concrete specific examples of Swadi Sandhi. Let us study the sutras that we shall study while studying the Swadi Sandhi. First, Sasajushoruhu 8266, Atororapplutadaplute 61113, Hashicha 61114, Bho Bhago Agho Apurvasya Yoshi 8317, Hali Sarvesham 8322, Rosupi 8269, Ro Ri 8314, Dhralope Purvasya Dirghonah 63111, Etattadosulopo Akoranai Samase Hali 61132, Sochilope Chet Padapuranam 61134, Prathamayoh Purvasavarnah 61102 and Nadichi 61104. Amongst them, let us start studying the Sutra Sasajushoruhu. This is 8266. This sutra consists of two padas, Sasajushaha and Ruhu. Sasajushaha is 6/1 of Sasajush. Sasajush is made up of two components, Sa, which refers to the sound Sa, and Sajush. So, Sasajushaha means in place of Sa and in place of the word Sajush. Ruhu is 1/1 of Ru, referring to R, and so Ruhu stands for substitute in the form of R. So, Sa and Sajush, they are the substituents, Ru is the substitute. The other word continued is Padasya, 6/1 of Pada. In this case, this Padasya means which is part of a Pada. So, the meaning is this 6/1 and this 6/1, they match, and so this becomes the qualifier of this 6/1, and so we get the meaning in place of Sa that comes at the end of the Pada, and in place of the word Sajush, substitute Ru. So, we have Ramas, which is 1/1, and this Sa comes at the end of the Pada. So, this Sa is substituted by Ru by 8266. So, we get Ramaru as the output, and then this Ramaru is substituted by Ramara, and finally this Ra is substituted by the Visarga. So, finally we get the form Ramaha, which is 1/1. Similarly, Sajush is then substituted by Sajuru, then this Ru is substituted by R, and then because of this R, this short vowel gets lengthened because of the sutras that apply. And so finally we get the form Sajuhu, which is the 1/1 of Sajush. So this is how Sasajushoruhu applies. It substitutes Ru in place of Sa. This is the requirement, this is the base for the Swadi Sandhi to happen, because the Swadi Sandhi is going to state the substitutes in place of Ru. We should note one unwritten rule, which is Ashi Raha in Sanskrit. So, Ashi stands for 7/1 of Ash, which means all vowels plus H plus semi-vowels plus consonants 5, 4 and 3. So, Ashi means immediately before. Raha is 1/1 of R, sound R, and so this is the substitute. What this sutra means is the following: immediately before Ash, in place of R, substitute R. So, we have r plus ash as the input in this way, and the output is r slash a. There is no other modification or substitution that takes place. So, it is stated that this grammar is ashiraha. Here are the examples. Pratar plus atra. In this case, this is a part of ash. So, this r is not substituted by any other modification. So, it remains as r, and so we have prataratra. Similarly, pratar iha, r is substituted by r only. Similarly, pratarasha, r has no other substitution. Pratar hasati, this is part of ash. Pratar gacchati, once again this is part of ash, and so r is substituted by r only. Punar milamaha, punar janma, in all these cases r coming at the end of the pada is not substituted by any other element because there is ash that follows. However, this is a more general rule. If we specify the left hand side environment, then there is scope for some more change in place of r. One more thing to note over here is that this r is not part of any sup. So, we can say that there are r which we see at the end of the padas, which can be classified into two. R which is part of the underived lexemes like pratar and punar. So, we have pratar plus ash and we get the substitute pratar only, there is no other substitution. Similarly, pratar plus khar plus avasana and pratar becomes prataha. However, if you have r which is part of ru, then the substitutes are u and y. How we shall study this now? So, in Swadi Sandhi, we primarily study this second part of second type of ru, which is the substitution in place of s, and then this ru or r gets substituted by either u or by y or by deletion. This is what is Swadi Sandhi, and this is what we are going to study now. First, let us study atorora plutada plute. This sutra has got 4 padas: ataha, roho, aplutad and aplute. Ataha is 5/1 of at, referring to short a. So, ataha means immediately after. Roho is 6/1 of ru, which means in place of ru. Aplutat is 5/1 of apluta, meaning not apluta, and aplute means 7/1 of apluta, meaning not a pluta, and immediately before this apluta. So, aplutat qualifies ataha, and the other 2 words continued in the sutra are ut, which is 1/1 of ut, which means short u, and this short u is the substitute, and ati, which is 7/1 of at referring to short a. So, ati means immediately before. Overall, the sutra means in place of ru, which comes immediately after a short a and which is not a pluta, and which is followed by a short a which is also not a pluta, substitute u. Once again, in place of ru, substitute u. What are the other conditions? In place of ru, which comes immediately after a short a, and this a should not be a pluta, and this a is followed by a short a which is also not a pluta. Then this ru is substituted by u. This can be put in the form of an equation in the following manner. So, if you have this pada and there is a towards the end of this pada, followed by ru plus a, then this ru gets substituted by u. Now once this ru is substituted by u, this becomes an input for other rules, notably the guna sandhi vidhayaka sutra, namely adgunaha, and this a and u, this becomes an input, and in place of both of them, a plus u plus a plus u is substituted by o plus a, and then o plus a is substituted by the purva rupa, namely o. Here are the examples. Shivas plus archaha. So we have sa getting substituted by ru, shivaru plus archaha. Then we have shivar plus archaha, where u is marked as it and is deleted. Now this r appears at the end of the pada. Before that there appears a short u. This is obviously not a pluta. After this r appears a short a, which is obviously not a pluta. Now in this case this r is substituted by u. So we have shiva u plus archaha. Now this a plus u is further substituted by the guna sandhi by adgunaha, and so we have shivo plus archaha. And then once again there is this purva rupa sandhi engap padanta dati, which applies and substitutes one o, that is purva rupa, in place of two o plus a. And so we have finally shivorchaha as the finally derived form. As you see, there are two padas over here, shivas and archaha, and this sa is coming into the contact of the next pada, and then this gets modified into u, and finally there is a sandhi and there is a form shivorchaha that is derived. So two padas losing their boundaries and both of them getting merged into each other. This is what is the function of this particular sandhi. This is the sentential boundary. Similarly, we have vrikshas plus atra, sa coming at the end of the pada, so sasajushoruhu applies, and so we have vriksharu plus atra, so vrikshar plus atra. Then this r is preceded by short a, which is not a pluta, and then this r is followed by short a, which is also not a pluta. Then in place of this r, u is substituted, so we have vriksha u atra, vriksho atra by the sutra adgunaha. Finally engap padanta dati applies and we get the form vrikshotra. Similarly, we have another sutra called Hashicha, 61114. Hashicha has got two padas, Hashi and Cha. Hashi is 7/1 of Hash. Hash stands for Ha plus semi-vowels plus consonants 5, 4 and 3. Hashi means immediately before Hash. Words continued are Ataha of 5/1 of At. At stands for short a, that is immediately after. Roho is 6/1 of Ru. Aplutat is 5/1 of Apluta. Ut is 1/1 of Ut. So Ru is the substituent and Ut is the substitute. So the meaning of the sutra is the following. In place of Ru, which comes immediately after a short a, which is not a pluta and which is followed by a hash, substitute u. I repeat, in place of ru, which comes immediately after a short a and which is not a pluta and which is followed by a hash, substitute u. So this is the equation form of this particular statement. If we have a plus ru followed by hush, then this ru is substituted to u first, and then a plus u is substituted to o plus hush. So, a plus u becomes o, and you have a plus u plus hush being substituted by o plus hush. So, this is adgunaha that plays an important role over here. Here are the examples. Here we have Shivas plus Hasati first, in which sa comes at the end of the first pada, followed by ha, which is part of the verbal root hasa, and this pada Hasati is a tinganta. So, Shivas plus Hasati is part of a sentence. So, one subanta and one tinganta are in close proximity. Now, sa is substituted by ru by sasajusho ruhu. So, we have Shivaru plus Hasati. Then this u at the end is substituted by 0. So, we have Shivar plus Hasati. Now, this r, which is preceded by short a, which is not pluta, and which is followed by ha, which is hush, and therefore this r is substituted by u. So, we have Shiva u Hasati, and then we have adgunaha applying and get Shivo Hasati. Similarly, Shivas plus Yati, sa is substituted by ru by r, and now this r appears at the end of a pada, preceded immediately by short a and followed immediately by ya, that is a hush, and therefore this r gets substituted by u by the sutra hashicha. And so, we have Shiva plus u plus Yati, and then a plus u becomes o by the sutra adgunaha, and so we have Shivo Yati. Similarly, Shivas Vandyaha, and we have Shivaru Vandyaha, and then finally we get Shiva u Vandyaha, and then by adgunaha we get Shivo Vandyaha. Similarly, Shivas plus Ramaha, so Shivaru Ramaha, Shivar Ramaha, Shiva u Ramaha, and finally Shivo Ramaha. Then we have Shivas plus Labhaha and Shivaru plus Labhaha, Sasajushoruhu, Shivar plus Labhaha, and then this ru is substituted by u. So, we have Shiva u Labhaha, and then adgunaha Shivo Labhaha. Similarly, Shivas plus Yunguve, Yunguve begins with y, so it is part of hush, and so Shivas plus Yunguve will give us Shivo Yunguve as the finally derived output. Similarly, Shivas Manyate being the input, and we get the final output in the form of Shivo Manyate, where ru is substituted by u, and then adgunaha takes place, and a and u are both substituted by o, which is a guna substitute. So, we get Shivo Manyate. Similarly, we have Shivas plus Gavate as the input, where sa appears at the end of the pada, and so Sasajusho Ruhu applies, and then this r is substituted by u. Then finally adgunaha applies, and we get Shivo Gavate as the output. Similarly, Shivas plus Nakaraha, and the output generated is Shivo Nakaraha. Similarly, Shivo Naha is the output generated from the input Shivas plus Naha in the same fashion. Also, we have Shivas plus Jhashaha being the input, and the output generated is Shivo Jhashaha. And finally, Shivo Bharaha is the output that is generated from Shivas plus Bharaha. Then we have Shivas plus Ghagati as the input, and the derivation process happens, and we get Shivo Ghagati which consists of the guna between a and u. Then we have Shivas plus Dhaukate, and finally we get Shivo Dhaukate. Then we have Shivas plus Dharaha, and the finally derived form is Shivo Dharaha. Then Shivas plus Jayaha as the input, and the finally derived form is Shivo Jayaha. Then we have Shivas plus Bandhaha as the input and Shivo Bandhaha as the output. Shivas plus Gadati is the next example. The same derivation process happens and we get Shivo Gadati as the finally derived output of the sentence. Then Shivas plus Damaruhu, and we get Shivo Damaruhu as the output. And finally Shivas plus Deshaha, and the output generated is Shivo Deshaha. In all these examples, the sutra Hashicha plays an important role. One thing we should note over here, and it is this, that this sandhi and the sutras that we have studied so far give us an exception to the asiddha principle in the Ashtadhyayi. What is the asiddha principle? Generally, the output of the sutra in the asiddha section, that is from 821 up to 8468, does not become the input for any previous sutra. This is asiddha principle. But in this case we see that the output of 8266, that is Ru in place of S, becomes the input for 61113 and 114. This is clearly an exception to the asiddha principle stated in the sutra Purvatra Siddham, that is 821. There is one more example of this kind that we shall study when we study the Prakriti Bhava. That we shall do later on in the course. To summarize, Swadi Sandhi is a peculiar type of Sandhi that occurs in a specific environment. The environment is direct part of the sentence derivation at its final stage. This Swadi Sandhi requires padas as the input and returns the sentential combinations as output. In this lecture, we studied the U substitution that substitutes Ru at the end of this pada. Now let us study the Ya substitution in the next lecture. Thank you for your patience.